The rain came down in relentless sheets, drumming against the windshield of Daniel Carter's old pickup truck as he drove along the dark country road. The wipers struggled to keep up, smearing water across the glass instead of clearing it, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind was heavy with exhaustion after another 12-hour shift at the auto repair shop. Life had been hard since his father passed away and left him the small house on the edge of town. Between bills piling up and a job that paid just enough to survive, Daniel lived each day in a blur of grease-stained hands, aching muscles, and quiet solitude. He wasn't the kind of man who asked for much, and most people drove past him without a second thought. But on that stormy night, fate had other plans. As he rounded a bend, his headlights caught something unusual on the side of the road, a sleek black sedan with its hazard lights flashing. The car looked far too expensive for a backroad like this, its glossy paint dulled by the storm, and beside it stood a figure in a suit, shoulders hunched against the rain. The man was fumbling helplessly with a tire iron, clearly no match for the stubborn bolts holding the flat tire in place. Daniel slowed down, instincts taking over before his tired brain could argue. Pulling over to the shoulder, he cut the engine and stepped out into the icy rain, his boots sinking into the mud. "Need a hand?" Daniel called, raising his voice over the storm. The man looked up, startled but relieved, his soaked hair plastered against his forehead. "Yes, please. I can't get this thing to budge." His voice carried the crisp accent of someone used to boardrooms and polished speeches, not roadside emergencies. Daniel set down his worn toolbox, crouching by the wheel. His fingers worked with practiced precision, loosening the stubborn bolts within seconds. He jacked the car up, swapped the ruined tire for the spare, and tightened everything with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. The man watched silently, a mix of frustration and admiration flickering in his eyes as Daniel worked. Within 10 minutes, the job was done. Daniel rose, wiping his wet hands on his jeans. "You're good to go now," he said simply. The suited man reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of bills, pressing it toward Daniel. "Take this. It's the least I can do." Daniel shook his head firmly, stepping back. "Don't need it. Just glad you'll get home safe." The man studied him for a long moment, as though weighing something important. Finally, he slipped the money back into his pocket, his expression unreadable. "You've done more than you know tonight," he said quietly, his words carrying an odd weight. Before Daniel could ask what he meant, the stranger got into the car, started the engine, and disappeared into the rain. Daniel stood alone by the roadside, water dripping down his face, confusion lingering in his mind. He shrugged it off, climbed back into his old truck, and continued home. Little did he know, that small act of kindness had just set his life on a path that would change everything. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the streets washed clean, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth. Daniel Carter sat at his small kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring absently at the newspaper he couldn't afford to subscribe to but had found outside the local diner. His mind wasn't on the headlines though, it kept circling back to the man from the night before. Something about his words, "You've done more than you know tonight," echoed in Daniel's head. Who exactly had he helped? The car had been too polished, the suit too fine, and the man's presence too commanding to be ordinary. Daniel brushed the thought aside, convincing himself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on him. But the universe had a way of answering doubts quickly. The low rumble of engines outside made him glance toward the window. At first, he thought it was just traffic, but when he pulled the curtain back, his breath caught. Parked in front of his modest home was the same black sedan from last night, gleaming in the sunlight as if the storm had never touched it. But this time, it wasn't alone. 2 police cruisers flanked it, their lights flashing silently, casting streaks of red and blue across his weathered porch. Daniel's pulse quickened. He hadn't done anything wrong. Why were the police here? He stepped outside cautiously, the morning chill biting his damp shirt. The door of the black sedan opened, and out stepped the suited stranger. He looked just as composed as he had the night before, except now he carried an air of authority that made the uniformed officers behind him seem like shadows. "Mr. Carter," the man said smoothly, as though addressing an equal. "I didn't get the chance to properly thank you for what you did last night." Daniel crossed his arms, wary. "You didn't need to. I just changed a tire. Happens all the time." The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "To you, perhaps. But to me, it was far more than that. You may not realize it, but you saved my life." He paused, letting the words sink in. "My name is Richard Hale." Daniel's brow furrowed. The name struck something familiar, and when he glanced at the newspaper still in his hand, his eyes widened. Splashed across the front page was a headline, "Richard Hale, billionaire industrialist, in town for landmark deal." The face in the picture was unmistakable, it was the man standing before him. The realization hit Daniel like a punch. He had helped one of the wealthiest, most influential men in the country without even knowing it. But the question burning in his chest was, why was Hale here now? Before Daniel could ask, one of the police officers stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, for your safety, we'll need you to come with us." Daniel's confusion deepened. "My safety? From what?" Richard Hale's expression hardened, his voice dropping lower. "Because the men who sabotaged my car last night know someone interfered. And they don't leave witnesses." Daniel sat stiffly in the back seat of the black sedan as the convoy of police cruisers escorted them down the highway. The world outside blurred into streaks of sunlight and shadow, but his mind was far too restless to notice. Everything about the situation felt surreal. Less than 12 hours ago, he had been elbow-deep in grease, patching up a customer's old truck at the repair shop. Now he was riding beside Richard Hale, a billionaire industrialist whose name appeared in every news outlet and business journal. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his rough work clothes and calloused hands a sharp contrast to the polished leather interior around him. He didn't belong in this car, in this world. Yet somehow, fate had forced him into it. Richard sat calmly, his gaze fixed ahead, though the weight in his voice betrayed the gravity of what he was about to reveal. "Mr. Carter," he began, "what happened last night wasn't an accident. My car didn't just suffer a flat, it was sabotaged. If you hadn't stopped when you did, I would have been stranded long enough for my enemies to make their move." He turned slightly, meeting Daniel's stunned expression. "The men behind this are not petty criminals. They are dangerous, powerful people who stand to lose billions if I succeed in closing a deal I've been working on for years. They want me silenced before that happens." Daniel blinked, the reality sinking in like cold water. "So you're saying I walked into the middle of some kind of corporate war?" Richard's lips curved into a humorless smile. "Something like that. And by helping me, you disrupted their plan. That makes you a liability in their eyes. They don't know your name yet, but they will. Which is why you're under protection now." Daniel clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing. He was a mechanic, not a fighter. His life revolved around oil changes, brake repairs, and keeping his head down. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't volunteered to play hero. "This is insane," he muttered. "I just did what anyone would have done. I didn't sign up to be part of your war." Richard regarded him thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But life doesn't always ask for our permission before it changes. You saved my life, Mr. Carter. That makes you part of this whether you like it or not." The car turned off the main road, winding through a gated estate surrounded by high stone walls and patrolled by guards. Daniel's eyes widened as the iron gates closed behind them. The mansion that came into view wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, a command center buzzing with security personnel and blinking monitors. Inside, Daniel was ushered into a spacious study lined with bookshelves and glowing screens that displayed live feeds from across the city. As Richard's team laid out blueprints, intelligence reports, and surveillance images, Daniel realized the truth. His simple act of kindness hadn't just changed one man's night, it had altered the course of something far larger. He was no longer just a mechanic from a small town. He was a thread in a web of power, danger, and secrets that stretched farther than he could imagine. And deep down, one terrifying thought clawed at him: if the people after Hale were as ruthless as he claimed, then Daniel's quiet, ordinary life was over forever. The first 2 days at Richard Hale's estate felt like a fever dream to Daniel. He was surrounded by men in suits with earpieces, high-tech security systems, and more wealth than he could comprehend. Everywhere he turned, someone was watching him, briefing him, or handing him a list of protocols for his own protection. At night, he lay awake in the lavish guest room, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a flat tire on a rainy night had thrown his life into chaos. He wanted to go home, to the squeaky mattress in his old house, to the smell of motor oil and rusted tools, to a life where the most dangerous thing he faced was a stubborn carburetor. But Richard's words haunted him: they don't leave witnesses. No matter how much he wished it away, Daniel knew his life would never be the same. The storm came on the third night. Not from the sky this time, but from the shadows. Daniel had wandered into the garage, a place that reminded him most of home. The rows of luxury cars gleamed under the overhead lights, but it was the tool benches, the smell of steel and oil, that gave him comfort. He was tinkering with an engine out of habit when the alarm shrieked, splitting the silence like a blade. Within seconds, the estate erupted into chaos. Guards rushed down the halls, radios crackling, as red warning lights flashed across the compound. Daniel's heart pounded. He ducked behind a workbench, adrenaline surging, and then he heard them, heavy boots splashing through puddles outside the garage doors. Armed intruders. The men who had sabotaged Richard's car were here, and they had come prepared. His first instinct was to hide, to wait for Richard's security team to handle it. But when the garage doors burst open and masked men stormed inside, Daniel knew he couldn't just cower. He wasn't trained, wasn't armed, but he had something they didn't: his mechanic's instincts. Thinking fast, he grabbed a length of steel pipe and swung it against the breaker box, plunging the garage into darkness. The intruders cursed, stumbling in the pitch black. Daniel moved quickly, using the space like it was his own workshop. He slammed a heavy tool chest onto its side, blocking one man's path. Another tripped over oil he deliberately spilled across the floor. When two attackers forced their way deeper inside, Daniel seized a wrench, striking one across the arm and shoving the other into a closing hydraulic lift. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't graceful, but it was enough to buy time. By the time Richard's guards stormed in, the remaining intruders were retreating, two already subdued in the corner thanks to Daniel's quick thinking. He stood there, chest heaving, sweat and oil streaked across his face, still clutching the wrench like a weapon. The guards looked at him with something between shock and respect. Later, as dawn broke over the estate, Richard approached him in the garage. His expression was solemn, but his eyes carried something Daniel hadn't seen before: deep gratitude. "You could have run," Richard said quietly. "But you didn't. You fought. You saved more than just my life tonight, you saved everyone here." Daniel shook his head, trying to downplay it. "I just used what I knew. Tools, timing, a little luck." Richard smiled faintly. "That's what makes you extraordinary. You didn't choose this fight, but you faced it anyway. That's what real courage looks like." For the first time, Daniel realized the truth. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was proof that even the most ordinary man, armed with nothing but instinct and heart, could rise when the world demanded it. And though his old life was gone, a new one had begun, one that had started with a flat tire in the rain, and ended with him standing as an unlikely hero.